My divorced sister-in-law showed up at my house with her suitcases, ready to live off me and demanding $30,000 for cosmetic surgery to hunt for a millionaire. The moment I refused, my mother-in-law slapped me, but that wasn't what I was expecting. Chicago. A late autumn afternoon, the cool wind snaked through the branches of the maple trees, now almost bare of leaves. The dry asphalt and pale sun bathed the rooftops of the exclusive suburb on the outskirts of the city in a honey-colored light. In a place like this, where life is observed through wrought iron fences and gleaming picture windows, it's easy to assume that peace reigns in every house and that every person is happy. Viewed from the outside, my house seemed like one of those spacious and elegant, with a small, manicured garden, a garage with high-end cars, and a kitchen from which the aroma of a hearty stew always emanated. Only those of us who lived inside knew that the more beautiful a house is, the harder it is for the sighs to be heard from the outside. My name is Ava, and I'm 33 years old. If you saw me on the street, many would think I'm the typical woman with a dream life. My husband holds a senior position at a major designer furniture company. My daughter is a sweetheart. We live in a magnificent house, and I don't have to struggle to make ends meet. Sometimes I hear people's comments and can't help but smile bitterly. They say how lucky she is, just taking care of her daughter and living like a queen. Hearing that, I can only smile. People see the pretty curtain, but few know about the drafts that seep in from behind. My husband is Matthew, 4 years my senior. He's a tall man, soft-spoken, who knows how to conduct himself in any social situation. He maintains the composure of a successful man. At the beginning of our marriage, I considered myself fortunate. Matthew wasn't a loud man or a spendthrift. He knew how to make others trust him as a pillar of strength. And sometimes, women just need a kind word at the right moment, a hand extended at the right instant, to believe that person can accompany us for the rest of our lives. But a marriage isn't a path you can measure by looking only at the first stretch. My daughter's name is Lily, and she is 6 years old. She has big, clear eyes and a sensitive, reserved nature with strangers. Though at home she's a whirlwind of joy, Lily loves to draw. She prefers a box of colored pencils to any doll. At night, she can't sleep without hugging a cream-colored teddy bear, worn down by time. Often, when I was exhausted, just seeing her sitting engrossed, coloring a house with smoke coming out of the chimney, was enough to calm my heart. She is the most tender part of my life and the reason I have endured so much, with the sole hope that she would have a father and a mother, a home that appeared intact to the world. Also, living in our house is my mother-in-law, Helen, 62 years old. She's not the kind of woman who makes a scene in public. Her cruelty wasn't in shouting, but in her gaze, in the set of her mouth, in sentences that seemed innocent but, upon reflection, deeply wounded one's self-esteem. She never openly said she disliked me, but 7 years as her daughter-in-law were enough for me to understand. In her eyes, I was a social climber, someone not on her level who had been lucky enough to enter that house, and therefore, I should be submissive, endure, and fulfill my role. She used to look me up and down whenever I wore something a bit more stylish, then casually remark, "You're always so put together, just to be at home with the child." It seemed like a joke, but only those of us who have been daughters-in-law understand the weight of those words. 7 years is neither a long nor a short time, but it was enough to transform a young, hopeful, and infatuated woman into a woman accustomed to swallowing her words. In the early years, Matthew still kept up appearances. Whenever my mother-in-law made a passive-aggressive comment, he would intervene to smooth things over. But over time, that consideration faded, like autumn leaves. He began to get used to my silence, to take for granted that dinner would be hot, the clothes ironed, and the house tidy. He got used to the idea that anything his mother said was advice, and if his wife felt hurt, it was because she was overthinking things. Once, I had a fever of almost 104. I felt faint, but I had to force myself to get up and make soup because Helen said she didn't like takeout. When Matthew came home from work, he found me lying on the sofa, my forehead drenched in sweat. He only asked, "Have you taken anything?" I said yes. He mumbled an ah, went to shower, and sat down at the table as if it were any other day. I remember turning to face the back of the sofa, a bitter thought striking me. How curious. How people who live under the same roof, so close they can hear each other breathe, can have their hearts as far apart as if they were on opposite banks of a river. I'm not a woman who argues, nor do I like to air dirty laundry. There were days when, after my mother-in-law's criticisms, I would simply clear the table in silence, wash the dishes, and go to bed early with my daughter. I used to think it was better to give in to keep the peace. With an elderly mother in the house and a husband stressed from work, being a little more flexible wouldn't cost me anything. But life is strange. The more you retreat, the more others believe you have no limits. The more you endure, the more they think you were born to endure. Dinner in my house was usually at 7:30 p.m. I cooked, set the table, served, and remembered which dishes my mother-in-law disliked, which were my daughter's favorites, and what my husband always ate. However, I rarely received a compliment. If the baked salmon was perfect, Matthew would say, "It's not bad today." If the soup was a bit bland, Helen would set her bowl down with a sharp clink, just enough for me to know that reprimands would follow. One day, Lily was chattering about school, laughing. Mid-sentence, my mother-in-law frowned. When we eat in silence. With all that talking, no one can swallow. The little girl looked down and fell silent. My heart sank, but all I could do was put a piece of her omelet on her plate and gently stroke her back under the table. To the outside world, we were still an exemplary, well-mannered family, with dinners where everyone was present. A working husband, a stay-at-home wife, and a grandmother who sometimes walked her granddaughter to the gate so the neighbors could comment on how lucky that family was. But only those on the inside knew that this discipline was often a beautiful tablecloth covering a wobbly table. With a strong enough push, everything would come crashing down. That afternoon, while I was taking the laundry off the line, the autumn wind wrapped a silk scarf around my hand. I suddenly felt an unusual weight in my heart. It wasn't because of Helen's comment that morning, implying that buying imported formula for the baby was an indulgence, nor was it because Matthew had been leaving early and coming home late for 3 days, exchanging barely a handful of words with me. It was a vague feeling, as if the entire house were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I looked up at the iron gate of the garden. The sunset light painted the bars an ochre color. In the kitchen, the bone broth was simmering on low heat. On the small desk by the window, Lily had left a half-finished drawing of a house, with 3 people holding hands under a perfectly round sun. Children always draw homes with straight, peaceful lines. Only adults live in houses where the heart is always on edge, never knowing when a strong gust of wind will shatter everything we've tried to preserve. Standing in the yard, now illuminated by the garden lights, I understood something with crystal clarity. There are marriages that look like fortresses from the outside, but are colder than an empty room on the inside. And I, after 7 years of telling myself I had to endure, to stay quiet, to do it for my daughter, was starting to feel exhausted. If someone were to ask me, who knows me best in this world, I probably wouldn't say my husband, but my father. Arthur, my father, isn't the type of man to lavish words of affection, nor does he usually hug his daughter to comfort her like in the movies. He belongs to that old-school American breed of man, measured in his actions, a man of few words, for whom a given word is more important than his own image. What he promises, he delivers. And when he's silent, it's because he's thinking long-term. Anyone who saw my father from the outside would consider him a serious man. But at home, we all knew that seriousness was the armor protecting a huge heart. My mother's family has always had strong principles. From a young age, they taught me that having money doesn't give you the right to look down on anyone, and that having an education doesn't permit you to be arrogant. When you enter someone else's home, you greet them. When you sit at the table, you must be respectful. My mother passed away early, and as an only child, my father adored me. But his love was not synonymous with indulgence. He never raised me to be dependent on a man. On the contrary, he always told me, "A woman can be delicate, but not weak. She can yield, but she must never allow others to get used to bending her. The day I introduced him to Matthew, my father observed him for a long time, not with suspicion, but with the gaze of an experienced man evaluating his interlocutor in every gesture, every word. That day, Matthew behaved impeccably. He was polite, poured the water, showed interest in everything, and spoke of his work with ambition. Sitting beside him, I felt relieved, believing my father would finally be at ease. But later, when we were alone in the living room, he told me something I have never forgotten. "Matthew is a clever man," he said slowly. "And being clever isn't bad. But remember that a man who is too clever often knows how to hide his true self very well." In love as I was, I didn't like that comment. I retorted that marriage was based on feelings, not a contract to be weighed. My father didn't get angry or raise his voice. He just looked at me with a mixture of affection and helplessness. "I'm not forbidding you. It's your life, and you decide. But I'll just remind you of one thing. A man who treats you well during courtship won't necessarily treat you well when you're his wife. Before the wedding, everyone minds their manners. It's in cohabitation that true nature comes to light." Still, I insisted on marrying Matthew. Now, looking back, I think my father understood from that day that his daughter needed to stumble to learn her lesson. He didn't stage any scenes to test my future husband. He didn't pretend to be poor to gauge his moral character. My father was much more practical. He always said that to know a person's heart, you must do it with dignity, not with tricks that only create absurd situations. The only thing he did was quietly prepare an escape route for me, with signed documents, with property titles in my name, with things that no one could dispute in the future. 3 months before we registered our marriage, the deed to the villa I live in was already in my name. The 2 cars in the garage, an SUV and a sedan, were also registered in my name from the beginning. All payments were made from a personal account my father had set up for me. He never boasted about it, nor did he use it to threaten my in-laws. Even on the wedding day, he organized a discreet and elegant celebration, without ostentation, so as not to wound the pride of the other family. He warned me very clearly, "Daughter, I'm giving you this so you can hold your head high if you need it, not so you can rub it in anyone's face." The genius of my father is that he always saw 2 steps ahead, while I, at the time, only saw what was right in front of me. I truly loved Matthew, and that's why I wanted to live like a normal woman. I didn't want my husband to feel he had married me for my family's money, nor for his family to treat me with suspicion because they knew I had a solid backing. That's why I chose silence. I accepted being seen as a simple, good girl, with no merit other than knowing how to run a household. Even Matthew's professional career after the wedding was boosted by my father, but in such a discreet way that if I hadn't known beforehand, Matthew himself might have thought it was all the fruit of his own talent. My father didn't give him a managerial position. He simply recommended him for a mid-level management role in one of his group's companies, according to his specialty, thus giving him the opportunity to grow as far as he could. At least publicly, it would depend on him. My father kept this connection secret from most people in the company. He said that for a man to feel fulfilled, he needs to feel he has risen on his own merits. If you give him everything, sometimes his pride is wounded, and things go wrong. At first, this way of acting seemed wonderful to me. I felt grateful to my father for protecting my husband's dignity while watching over me from the shadows. I once asked him why he didn't tell Matthew directly so he would understand his generosity. My father smiled bitterly. Those with true self-respect don't need to be reminded to be grateful, and for those who get used to receiving, thinking it's their right, telling them is pointless. At that moment, I nodded without giving it much thought. I never imagined that over time, every one of his words would come true in my life. My in-laws knew nothing about this. In Helen's eyes, I was just a daughter-in-law with more luck than merit, who had somehow managed to get a husband with a good job and a nice house, without having to worry about money. She never said it openly, but the intention was in every one of her phrases. Once, while peeling fruit, she commented to the air, "Sometimes a woman doesn't need to be brilliant, just to know how to choose a husband to save herself from suffering." Though it seemed like a trivial conversation, every word was a jab at me. I knew it, but I didn't want to explain. Doing so would have been like using my family to humiliate hers. I didn't want to turn my marriage into a battlefield between two families. So my silence, which was at first a choice, became my way of life. I voluntarily decided to live a step below so that peace would reign at home. I ignored some sarcastic comments to avoid putting Matthew in an uncomfortable position between his mother and his wife. I reminded myself that as a daughter-in-law, I should be prudent, to keep quiet at the right time, to keep the home together. Many nights, lying next to my daughter, I convinced myself I was doing the right thing. What woman hasn't thought at some point that if she's a little nicer, a little more understanding, others will eventually understand her? But life doesn't always work according to the logic one imagines. There are people who interpret your silence not as kindness, but as weakness. There are people who see your generosity not with gratitude, but as proof that you dare not defend what is yours. When they love you, any flaw seems like a virtue. When they hate you, any virtue seems like a flaw. And when someone is already predisposed to look down on you, the more you keep quiet, the more they advance without a second thought. That afternoon, after changing the sheets in Lily's room, I sat on the edge of the bed. My hands unconsciously stroked the fabric that still smelled of sunshine. Suddenly, the image of my father appeared in my mind. I remembered what he told me before the wedding. I can't live your life for you, but if one day you have to choose between saving the appearances of a marriage and saving your own peace, remember to choose the latter. The first time I heard that sentence, I thought that day was far away, as distant as a summer rain you've only heard about. But sitting in that room, I realized that there are things we believe are distant but have actually been waiting quietly on the other side of the door for a long time. That Saturday afternoon, the cold intensified in Chicago. The wind whistled as it passed through the trees in front of the gate. A sharp, thin sound, as if someone were gently running their fingers over glass. I had just picked up Lily from her painting class and was putting away her backpack when I heard the rattle of suitcase wheels on the patio. The sound wasn't loud, but in the usual silence of the suburb, it made me turn my head immediately. The iron gate opened, and Chloe, Matthew's sister, appeared. She was wearing a tight cream-colored knit dress, a short wool coat, and her hair was wavy, though messier than usual. Her lipstick was smudged, and her eyes were red and swollen. She was dragging 2 large suitcases and carrying a designer handbag that, if I remembered correctly, she had flaunted on social media a few months earlier. As soon as she saw her mother come out of the living room, Chloe dropped her suitcases and ran to hug her, bursting into tears. "Mom, I can't take it anymore. I can't go on living like this." Her way of crying was calculated to evoke compassion. It wasn't an uncontrolled sob, but a restrained, pain-filled cry, designed so that anyone who heard it would feel the need to defend her. Helen, pale, hugged her awkwardly, stroking her back as she guided her inside. Her voice was a torrent of questions. "What happened? Did that Jason do something to you? Tell me everything, honey." I stood a few steps away, still holding Lily's coat. The confused child looked at me and hid behind my legs. The cold air from the patio suddenly transformed into a different kind of cold, the cold of someone else's problems about to invade your home. Chloe sat on the sofa, took out a tissue, and dabbed at her tears while telling her story in a rush, as if she feared the emotion would fade. She said her husband, Jason, had been unbearable for months. When he came home from work, he was cold, barely spoke, and on top of that, he constantly criticized her spending, her lifestyle. She spoke between sobs, her voice broken with humiliation. "I haven't done anything wrong, Mom. All women need to take care of themselves, and he says all I know is how to spend money, that I'm a freeloader." Yesterday, he even threw a makeup case on the floor. Hearing this, Helen slapped the arm of the sofa. He dared? Does he think my daughter has nowhere to go? How ungrateful. After everything we've done for him. Silently, I placed a glass of warm water on the coffee table in front of Chloe. She gave me a fleeting glance, without a thank you, and continued dabbing her tears. She went on with her litany. Her mother-in-law looked down on her. Her husband didn't defend her. His family was too strict and critical. The story was seamless, and anyone hearing it would believe she was a wretched woman, pushed to the limit, who had no choice but to return to her mother's house. But for some reason, the more I listened, the more I felt something was off. I knew Chloe, and she wasn't one to endure things quietly. Since I joined this family, I knew my sister-in-law was a woman who knew how to enjoy life. She liked beauty, being pampered, luxury. She wasn't a bad person per se, but she lived by the motto "me first." If she went out, it had to be to a trendy spot. If she took a photo, she found the best angle. If she bought a handbag, it had to be the latest model. Her wedding, 3 years ago, was to a man from a wealthy family from Boston, owners of industrial workshops, people with no financial problems. So for her to suddenly appear here with 2 suitcases and a face that looked like she'd been betrayed by the whole world seemed suspicious, to say the least. Perhaps the only person in that moment serene enough to listen with her head and not her gut was me. I didn't interrupt. My 7 years of experience as a daughter-in-law had taught me that there are times when the more you speak, the more likely you are to be accused of being insensitive, especially when a crying daughter is in her mother's arms. It didn't matter if I was right or not. At that moment, any word from an outsider like me was superfluous. Helen peppered her with questions. "But did he hit you? Did he kick you out?" Chloe looked down, shook her head, and uttered a devastating sentence. "He didn't hit me, but he told me living with me is suffocating, that if I don't change, it's best we get a divorce so we can both breathe." Hearing the word divorce, Helen exploded. She gripped her daughter's hand tightly, her voice turning into a shriek. "Divorce? Who does he think he is? He can't just marry my daughter and then get rid of her as if she were nothing. Come back home. Stay here with your mother. We'll see who dares to look down on my daughter." I felt a tightness in my chest. Not because I didn't feel for a woman with marital problems, I was a woman too, and the idea of a broken home saddened me. But one thing is empathy, and another is letting emotions cloud reason. Because in a family, everything has practical consequences. To a stranger, going back to your mother's for a while sounds simple. But for someone living in that house, like me, it means a radical change. The space, the routine, everyone's rhythm of life. My house, though elegant, was not exactly a palace with spare rooms. The ground floor had the living room, the kitchen, and a room for Helen, who couldn't climb stairs due to her knee problems. On the second floor were our bedroom and Lily's. The third floor was an office we also used for storage. It wasn't set up for living. If Chloe stayed for a couple of days, we could manage. But from the way Helen was talking, I knew she wasn't thinking of a short stay. I sat in a nearby armchair and, choosing my words very carefully, said, "Mom, why don't we let Chloe rest for a few days to calm down, and then we'll see what to do." Matthew could call and talk to them. Sometimes things get more complicated in the heat of the moment. I spoke slowly, delicately, almost on tiptoe, knowing it wasn't the time to impose anything. Even so, Helen turned to me, and her gaze instantly hardened. I knew that look. It was the one she gave me whenever I dared to contradict her, as if my mere opinion was a problem. "What do you mean?" she asked in a falsely calm voice. "The girl is suffering, and you want us to kick her out?" Before I could answer, Chloe bowed her head and sobbed again, right on cue. A consummate actress. She didn't need to say anything more. Her helpless appearance was enough to make my reasonable suggestion sound like a cold, selfish calculation. I had to explain myself. "That's not my intention. I just thought if we talked to her husband first, maybe things wouldn't escalate." Helen cut me off. "Whether they escalate or not is their business. This is her mother's house, and if she wants to come back, she comes back. Or are we going to leave my daughter on the street when there's plenty of room?" The sentence, on the surface, was full of motherly love, but in that my daughter, I always felt the implicit exclusion of the rest. The confirmation that I would never truly be part of the family. Lily, who had been by my side the whole time without understanding anything, gently tugged at my clothes and whispered, "Mommy, is Aunt Chloe staying to play with me?" I knelt to stroke her hair, not knowing what to answer. At that moment, Chloe looked up and gave her niece a forced smile. "Yes, sweetie. Auntie is staying for a few days." Only I, looking at the two perfectly packed suitcases next to the table, understood the truth. Someone fleeing home in a panic grabs the first thing they can. Someone who arrives with two suitcases like that has probably been planning their retreat for some time. But I said nothing. Speaking at that moment would only bring me trouble. Helen had already stood up, personally taking her daughter's handbag and ordering me to bring some orange juice. Then she turned to Chloe and assured her not to worry about anything, that her mother would take care of everything. Seeing the devotion with which she cared for her daughter didn't hurt me. A mother's love is natural. What chilled my blood was knowing that from the moment Helen took charge of the situation, this house would no longer function as before, and changes imposed by whim always bring a trail of consequences. I went upstairs with a pile of clean, ironed clothes in my arms, but I felt as if I were carrying a boulder. Downstairs, Helen's voice continued to resonate, interspersed with Chloe's sobs, which rose and fell in tone, creating a symphony of victimhood. There are people who cry out of pain, and people who cry to pave the way for their demands. I didn't dare judge my sister-in-law, but my instinct told me that that afternoon wasn't the day the problem exploded, but the day the problem walked through my door, dragging its suitcases across the marble of the foyer like an ominous premonition. They say you welcome guests with hospitality, but some guests, from the very first moment, cease to be considered as such. And I, from the top of the stairs, suddenly felt that my house, which already felt suffocating, had shrunk a little more. The next morning, just as I finished preparing Lily's breakfast, my mother-in-law called me into the living room. Helen was sitting with her back straight and Chloe beside her, her face still downcast but now neatly combed and with impeccable nails. I stood before them, sensing what I was about to hear. Helen was direct. "We need to reorganize the house. Now that Chloe is here, she needs a room. Clear out Lily's room for her." I was frozen. Trying to maintain my composure, I replied, "Mom, that's the little girl's room. She's used to sleeping alone. She has her school things there, her corner for painting. Why don't we prepare the room on the third floor for Chloe? I can help you clean it." She dismissed it with a wave of her hand. "The third floor is full of dust, and you have to climb so many stairs. The poor thing is suffering. Are you going to put her in a makeshift room? Lily can sleep with you for a few days. It won't hurt her." Beside her, Chloe sighed, playing the role of a martyr. "I just need a decent place to be quiet, sis." The word decent stabbed me in the chest. Didn't a 6-year-old girl also deserve decent treatment? I was about to argue when the door opened. It was Matthew. Seeing her son, my mother-in-law grew bolder and addressed him loudly. "Matthew, explain it to your Lily's room for Chloe. The girl can sleep with you." I looked at Matthew, hoping he would at least ask a question, but he just nodded indifferently. "It's not a big deal. The kid will like sleeping with us for a few days." "Matthew," I called him softly. "The child has her routines. Such a sudden change will upset her. She'll wake up at night and be tired for school." He frowned. "You always exaggerate, Ava. If Mom says so, just do it. And let's just keep the peace." The words "keep the peace" fell like a ton of bricks on any possible objection. I looked at my mother-in-law, sitting with a triumphant expression. I looked at Chloe, whose lips formed a tiny smile before returning to her sad grimace. I didn't argue anymore. 7 years as a daughter-in-law had taught me that in moments like these, any protest would only make me the villain of the story, and my daughter would still be the one to give in. I went upstairs and opened the door to Lily's room. The smell of paper, colored pencils, and chalk still lingered in the air. On the wall hung a drawing of a tree with a red heart and a house with 3 people holding hands. Seeing it, a lump formed in my throat. Lily ran after me, hugging her teddy bear. "Mommy, is Aunt Chloe going to sleep in my room?" she asked in a whisper. I knelt down and tried to smile. Yes, sweetie. Auntie is sad, so she'll stay here for a few days. You'll sleep with Mommy and Daddy. How fun. The girl didn't cry. She just pressed her lips together. But can I leave my paint box here? I nodded, but a shiver ran down my spine. If for the adults taking away a child's room was normal, how long would it be before they stopped respecting her things? I started packing, not my way, but as my mother-in-law had ordered, all of Lily's things to our room, so Chloe can be comfortable. I packed her books, notebooks, pencil cases, Legos, and blankets into boxes. Every object I lifted was like tearing away a piece of her childhood. Matthew helped for 5 minutes before leaving to take a call. Passing by a box, he commented, "Don't take it like a move, honey. It's just for a few days." I didn't answer. I just thought, for him, it was a few days. But for my daughter, it was her sanctuary, the place where she slept, dreamed, and grew. Lily, standing in the doorway, clutching her bear, watched in silence as I emptied her world. A child's silence sometimes hurts more than a cry. By afternoon, the room was half empty. Her art corner had disappeared, and only a couple of storybooks remained on the shelf. My mother-in-law said it was to maintain a childlike air. I sat on the edge of the bed and felt my eyes well up with tears. A woman can endure criticism directed at her, but to see her child's belongings taken away is unbearable. That night, Lily slept between Matthew and me. She turned towards me and clung to my nightgown. Matthew, looking at his phone, said distractedly, "Go to sleep. I'll take you to school tomorrow." The girl didn't answer. I stroked her back, listening to her soft breathing, and felt my heart contract. She didn't say it, but I knew she was wondering why her room was no longer her room. I stared at the ceiling for a long time. 7 years I had been protecting with my silence. A home where my daughter's rights could be sacrificed to satisfy others. I remembered my father's words. Yielding at the right moment is wisdom, but yielding in the wrong place is cowardice towards your own children. The first morning after Lily moved into our room, I woke up earlier than usual. Not out of diligence, but because the child hadn't slept a wink. She wasn't used to her father's light snores, nor the dim light from our bedside lamp, and certainly not the feeling of sleeping as a guest in her own home. At midnight, she would toss and turn, fumbling for her teddy bear, and snuggle against me, sighing as if having nightmares. I felt torn between tenderness and anguish. Tenderness because my daughter was suffering the consequences of adult decisions without understanding them. Anguish because the next morning she had to go to school, as if nothing had happened. Lily woke up late with dark circles under her eyes, her hair a mess, and a vacant expression. I quickly prepared her breakfast, warmed the milk, checked her backpack, and put her hair in a ponytail. As I was tying her shoelaces, my mother-in-law appeared in the kitchen doorway and, in a monotone voice, as if reading from a to-do list, said, "When you drop the girl off at school, come back and clean the room for Chloe. She doesn't like sleeping in a messy place." I looked up, ready to tell her I'd do it later, that I had to take the child and then go grocery shopping. But seeing her gaze, I swallowed my words. She hadn't asked if I had time. She had given me an order. That feeling was so familiar that sometimes I forgot I was her daughter-in-law and not the housemaid. On the way to the car, Lily grabbed my hand and asked in a low voice, "Mommy, can I go into my room this afternoon to get a book?" A lump formed in my throat. "Of course, sweetie, whatever you need." As I said it, I realized I was lying to her, because in that moment I understood that from now on, her room was no longer a place she could enter freely. It had become Aunt Chloe's room. The mere thought was devastating. When I got home, I had barely set the grocery bags on the counter when I heard the shuffle of slippers on the stairs. Chloe came down slowly, looking sleepy. She glanced around as if looking for a servant and said with complete naturalness, "Ava, I'd like an iced coffee with just a little sugar." I stood still for a second. She was a guest and speaking to me as if I were a barista. Trying to stay calm, I replied, "Why don't you make it yourself?" Everything you need is in the kitchen. Chloe wrinkled her nose. I'm just so exhausted. Besides, since you're home, what's the big deal? I didn't answer. I turned, got a glass, and told myself it wasn't worth arguing over a coffee. But when I placed it in front of her, she had the nerve to stir it and frown. You put too much ice in it. It's going to get watery. At that moment, Helen came out of her room and, hearing the complaint, jumped to her defense. She's going through a hard time, honey. Be a little more considerate with what you do. When a woman is suffering, she needs to be pampered. Standing in the middle of the kitchen, I felt something inside me break. She needed to be pampered at the expense of everyone else's sacrifice. And me? Was I not a woman? Was I not tired and suffering? Because no one said that I also needed to be pampered. In the afternoon, I picked Lily up from school. As soon as we entered the yard, her eyes instinctively went to the window of what used to be her room. She didn't run or jump as she usually did. She walked slowly, looking around as if she were afraid of making noise in a forbidden place. I took her to our room, and as I opened her backpack to get out her homework, she pleaded, "Mommy, I want to get my paint box. It's in the room." I told her to wait, that I would go get it for her. She didn't insist, just hung her head. A 6-year-old girl having to ask permission to get her own things. I felt a pang of pain. I went to the door of Chloe's room and knocked gently. No one answered. I knocked again. From inside, I heard the rustle of sheets and Chloe's sleepy, annoyed voice. "Who is it?" "It's me, Ava. Can I come in to get Lily's paint box?" The door opened a crack. Chloe looked me up and down as if I had interrupted her royal slumber. She stepped aside reluctantly and, yawning, said, "All these kids' things everywhere mess up the room." I entered. The once immaculate room was a chaos of clothes, makeup, and handbags. Lily's drawing corner had been pushed aside, and the large teddy bear that used to preside over the bed was now thrown at its foot. I found the paint box. My hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from anger. Anger at myself for letting things get to this point. Dinner went on as usual, but the atmosphere was different. Chloe ate while gossiping about her friends, beauty treatments, and trendy places, as if she were on vacation and not taking refuge in her mother's house. Helen smiled, delighted, and kept filling her plate. Matthew ate a little and got up to take a call, but not before giving me an order. "Make sure Mom and Chloe eat well." I looked at the table. I had made the stew. I had served the soup. I had dressed the salad. But my role in that house had been reduced to being the caretaker of others. No one asked if my daughter and I had everything we needed. That night, when I turned off the light, Lily turned, hugged me, and whispered, "Mommy, I want to sleep in my room." I kissed her forehead and quietly promised her she would soon. But as I said it, my heart sank. I knew that if I kept giving in, soon would become never. They say if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. I had yielded a step to keep the peace, but in return, I felt that my daughter and I were being pushed out of our own home. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't just feel sadness. I was starting to feel fear. Not fear of an argument, but fear that one day my daughter would get used to being disregarded, to growing up in an unbalanced home thinking it was normal. Chloe had been in the house for almost a week, and the word suffering had completely disappeared from her face. At first, she still feigned some sadness, but with her mother protecting her, she soon reverted to her old self, a person accustomed to being served and having priority in everything. In the morning, while I was getting Lily ready for school, Chloe wouldn't appear until almost 11. She'd come downstairs in a silk pajama set and, seeing me cleaning the kitchen, would casually say, "Ava, I'm hungry. Can you heat up some of last night's stew for me?" I would reply, "The food is in the fridge, Chloe. Heat it up yourself, please. I have to do a load of the girls' laundry." She would shrug. "I'm just so tired." Hearing the word tired, I would simply fall silent and go back to my work. It was a silence that had, over time, become a reflex. Emboldened, Chloe began leaving her things everywhere. The vanity in Lily's room became her cosmetics display. My daughter's closet was emptied to make room for her handbags. The second-floor bathroom always smelled of her cloying perfume, with towels thrown everywhere. When I mentioned it to her, she snapped, "It's not a big deal. You're so dramatic." My mother-in-law, overhearing, defended her. "Don't be so picky with her. The poor thing is depressed. Let her be comfortable." Comfortable meant I cleaned up her mess. Comfortable meant my daughter had to corner her things. I suddenly understood the saying, spare the rod, spoil the child. But Helen's love was different. It consisted of letting her daughter do whatever she wanted, no matter who it hurt. A few days later, she invited a friend over to vent. The two of them settled in the living room with the AC blasting, laughing and talking loudly. Chloe ordered me to make them tea, cut up some fruit, and added, "Serve it on a nice plate. My friend is very refined." As I did so, I could hear them talking about handbags, the best places to take photos. Lily came home from school and stood on the stairs, not daring to come down for fear of disturbing them. I looked at her, and my heart ached. She was in her own home and had to walk on tiptoe. Dinner time became a festival of favoritism. If Chloe praised a dish, Helen would smile with satisfaction and serve her more. If Lily said she didn't like onions, my mother-in-law would frown. So picky. Life is so hard, and you with all your fussiness. My blood boiled, but I clenched my hands under the table and reminded myself not to explode in front of the child. Helen even gave me instructions to cook exactly what Chloe liked. Because in times of sadness, one must eat well. As if the daughter-in-law and granddaughter of the house were born to serve her daughter while she overcame her crisis. Matthew continued his routine of leaving early and coming home late. One day, as soon as he arrived, his mother told him, "Ava was very unpleasant to Chloe today." He turned to me tiredly and said, "Have a little patience, honey, just so we can have peace in the house." "And the child?" I asked. He looked away. "Kids get used to everything." That sentence chilled my blood. Getting used to it meant growing up seeing that you always have to yield, be quiet, and endure. One afternoon, returning early from picking up Lily, I heard whispers from upstairs. I stopped on the stairs, clutching my purse, and listened to Chloe's sweet but sharp voice. Helen's voice, lower but firm, replied, "To hold your head high, you need something people admire." Chloe continued, "I need to invest in my image, my skin, my hair, my teeth, and buy some good clothes and a couple of decent handbags." Nowadays, men notice the physical appearance first. Helen nodded as if they had already discussed it. "You just stay here and relax." I didn't go up. I went to the kitchen, put down my purse, and pretended I hadn't heard anything. Lily ran in to show me a drawing, and I praised her with a forced smile, feeling a huge weight on my chest. Stay here and relax meant there was no return date, that my daughter's room had been taken from her indefinitely. That night, as I washed the dishes, the cold water couldn't cool the rage I felt inside. I began to understand that I wasn't just facing an inconsiderate sister-in-law, but a family system in which, by default, my role was to serve and yield. I finished putting away the last plate and saw my reflection in the window pane. It was still me, but my gaze had changed. It was no longer just sad. It was a look of alert, that of someone who knows that something in her own home is being threatened. That night, the Chicago sky was overcast, and the wind whistled in the cracks of the windows. I prepared a simple, comforting dinner, hoping the meal would pass peacefully so Lily wouldn't have to hear more arguments. But as soon as I set the table, I knew something was brewing. Chloe was wearing a tight sweater, was perfectly made up and coiffed, and couldn't stop looking at herself in her phone's screen. Helen, for her part, was beaming. She served her daughter the best pieces of meat and kept asking her questions as if she feared she lacked something. Chloe sighed, put down her cutlery, and said in a languid voice, "I think about my future, and it gives me such anxiety. A failed marriage marks you forever. People look at you differently." The word failure sent a chill down my spine. It's the worst label they can hang on a woman, as if her entire worth depends on her marital status. But Chloe wasn't being sincere. She paused just right and looked at her mother at the perfect moment, as if she were setting the stage. Helen, of course, played along. A woman is worth what her appearance is worth. You're still young. You have many opportunities. Men these days are very practical. If you know how to dress up, you won't lack for suitors. Chloe took out her phone, showed her mother a picture, and said, as if rehearsed, "They say to rebuild your life, you have to invest in yourself." I was serving Lily her food, and my hand stopped mid-air. The little girl looked at us, not understanding. I placed a hand on her shoulder, signaling for her to keep eating. I felt a deep discomfort. They were talking about women as if we were display items that, with a good coat of varnish, could change owners. Helen turned to me, her voice becoming falsely sweet. "Ava, as her sister-in-law, you have to support her. She's going through a hard time. We have to help her." I maintained my composure. "Of course I want Chloe to be well, Mom, but how can I help?" She put down her cutlery and looked at me intently. "I need you to give her $30,000. The atmosphere froze. I thought I had misheard. $30,000? I said. Chloe spoke up with astonishing clarity. "It's not to waste. It's for my total renewal package. Breast augmentation, dental veneers, skin treatments, a new hairdo, new clothes, and a decent handbag. With a good image, I can start going out and socializing again." Helen nodded. "See? She has it all planned out. Helping her now is helping the family." I was speechless for a few seconds. $30,000 was not a small amount, but what chilled my blood was the way they said it, as if my money were a common fund from which anyone could help themselves. I looked at Matthew. He was chewing slowly, not looking at me or his mother, avoiding the conflict. I asked him directly, "Matthew, what do you think?" He sighed. "Chloe is having a hard time. If we can help, we should help. It's not like we're short on money." The phrase "we're short on money" almost made me laugh. We? But I was the one taking care of everything. My daughter was the one suffering the consequences, and his mother and sister were the ones making the decisions. I tried to stay calm. "I don't agree." Helen frowned. "What do you mean you don't agree? You've been living like a queen for years, and now that your sister needs help, you're going to deny her a little money?" Chloe added with disdain. "You, who lives like a queen without lifting a finger, and you find it so hard to help me just once." I looked at Chloe and saw in her eyes not a request for help, but a demand. I said, slowly, so my voice wouldn't tremble, "If you want to get back on your feet, you have to do it for yourself. I am not giving you money for cosmetic surgery, designer clothes, and to call it finding a new husband." Helen slammed her hand on the table. "Don't talk to me with that arrogance. Just because you're my daughter-in-law doesn't give you the right to lecture me." Matthew looked at me, annoyed. "Ava, don't be like that. It's only $30,000. I turned to my husband and felt an immense void between us. Only. How easy it sounded from his mouth, and how heavy it was in my heart. I remembered the saying, "It's not what you give, but how you give it." And they didn't just want my money. They wanted me to give it voluntarily, and with a smile. I stood up and took Lily's plate. "Sweetie, finish your dinner in your room with me." The little girl looked at me, her eyes full of fear. I didn't want her to hear any more. Behind me, Helen's voice sounded icy. "A stingy, heartless woman. Sooner or later, she'll end up alone." I went upstairs, hugging my daughter, with a single, clear thought in my mind. From the moment I said no, I ceased to be the submissive daughter-in-law. I became an obstacle. And when you're an obstacle, what they want to take from you is never just the money. I took Lily to her room, helped her finish dinner and brush her teeth. She was being so good it broke my heart. She didn't ask any more questions, just glanced at me from time to time, as if making sure I was okay. When she fell asleep, hugging her teddy bear, I went out onto the balcony, closing the door so she wouldn't hear my sighs. The wind blew stronger, swirling the dry leaves in the yard. Leaning on the railing, looking at the lights of the suburb, I felt an intense cold inside me. It wasn't about the dinner. It was because for the first time, I saw clearly that in this house, they had gotten used to taking my submission for granted, as if I were born to serve and they to be served. When I returned to the room, Matthew was already there. He closed the door and said in a tired voice, "What's with all the drama? Mom and Chloe have a point. She's going through a hard time. Help her out and do a good deed." I looked at him and asked without raising my voice, "Did you hear Chloe say she wants the money for a breast augmentation, designer clothes, and to find a rich husband?" He avoided my gaze. "You always see the negative side. She needs to regain her confidence to move on." I let out a bitter laugh. Confidence paid for with my money. And my confidence, where do I get that from? From being treated like this house's ATM? Matthew started to get irritated. "What kind of talk is that? I work to support this entire family. What's it to you to help a little?" The phrase "I support the family" was like a slap in the face. I stood motionless. I didn't want to bring up the money issue, and certainly not use my family to humiliate him. But hearing him, I understood that he blindly believed that everything I had, I owed to him. I replied with an icy calm, "With what money do you support this house? How much money do you give me each month for the child's expenses? Groceries, bills, medicine? Or do you just support it by coming home for dinner and signing papers you think are yours?" He frowned. "Don't exaggerate. I don't want to argue." "Neither do I sighed. "But I'm telling you this so you understand. I'm not giving you those $30,000. Not because I'll miss it, but because I do not accept the way your mother and sister feel entitled to my money as an obligation I must fulfill." He was silent for a moment, then said something that chilled my blood. "You've been living very comfortably in this house for years. Helping my sister isn't such a big deal. Don't complicate things. Complicate things." I realized that what he feared wasn't hurting his wife's honor or his daughter's feelings, but the discomfort of being caught between his mother and me. And he chose the easiest path, forcing me to yield. Before I could answer, the door burst open. Helen stood there, her face impassive. "What are you two talking about behind closed doors?" Without waiting for an answer, she looked directly at me. "Don't overthink it. I'll be clear. In this house, we live by my rules. My daughter is suffering. If you won't help her, at least don't lecture her. A woman with such a wicked heart will pay for it sooner or later." The expression, "wicked heart," made my own heart pound. I replied, maintaining my composure, "I don't have a wicked heart, Mom. I simply don't agree to use my money for these things." Chloe appeared in the hallway with an offended expression, but her eyes glittered with rage. "You talk about not agreeing as if you have any right. If it weren't for my brother, what would you be in this house?" I turned to my sister-in-law. Her words, spoken so lightly, stabbed me like a dagger. I understood that they didn't just want my money. They wanted me to admit I was living on borrowed time so that all their demands would become a right. I said slowly, "Chloe, don't talk like that in front of the child." She smiled with disdain. "Even if she doesn't hear it, she'll learn it sooner or later. In this life, you have to know your place." Know your place? That phrase made me tremble with rage. But I held back. I didn't want Lily to see her mother turn into a fury. I looked at Helen. "Mom, allow me to say one thing. I have been your daughter-in-law for 7 years. You have never lacked a plate of food. I have never left the house messy. But I have no obligation to give Chloe money for surgery and designer clothes, and I will not do it." Helen let out a dry laugh. "Very well. Then from now on, don't complain if this family turns its back on you." Matthew, beside me, remained silent as a shadow, and that silence hurt more than an insult, because it told me he wasn't on my side, that he allowed his mother and sister to speak to me that way. That night, I went to bed hugging Lily. I heard her steady breathing, but my eyes remained open in the darkness. I thought of the old saying, when the husband gets angry, the wife falls silent. When the soup boils, you lower the heat. But I also understood that some pots don't burn from too much heat, but because someone keeps adding salt and forces you to swallow it. I hugged Lily tighter. In her peaceful breathing, I heard the beats of my own heart. It was no longer the heart of a woman who only wanted to save a home, but that of a mother who was learning to stand on her own feet. The next morning, I came downstairs early to the kitchen. Helen was already sitting at the table, her face as cold as the marble. Chloe came down shortly after, gave me a look of contempt, and turned away. I opened the cupboard, took out the rice, and started washing it in silence. A certainty grew inside me. From today on, submission was no longer an option. That afternoon, I picked Lily up from school under a pale autumn sun. The little girl was hugging a folder with her drawings and chattering away, telling me her teacher had praised her latest work, saying it had soul. Listening to her brought me some relief, like a sip of cool water after days of internal turmoil. She told me she had gotten a very good grade and wanted to use her new watercolor set to finish the drawing and show it to the teacher the next day. "Mommy, my watercolors are in my room, right?" she said, her eyes shining. I paused for a moment, hearing my room. I was about to remind her not to go in directly, but seeing her excitement, I softened. "Of course, sweetie. Go on up calmly while I put away your backpack." As soon as we opened the front door, a pungent smell of perfume and nail polish filled the air. I felt a pang of displeasure. Before I could react, Lily took off her shoes and ran up the stairs like an arrow. I followed her with a knot in my stomach, trying to convince myself she would just grab her paints and come out. A few seconds later, I heard her voice from upstairs. It wasn't a cry of joy, but a choked call. "Mommy!" I ran up, my heart in my throat. The door to the room was wide open. Lily was frozen in the doorway, pale, her lips pressed together. On the bed, Chloe was sitting comfortably, painting her toenails. In front of her was my daughter's watercolor box, open and destroyed. Several colors were rolling on the floor. Chloe was using one of the child's paintbrushes to apply a red polish that overflowed the edges like a bloodstain. Lily's drawing, the one with the good grade, trembled in her hands. She looked at the paint box, then at her aunt's nails, and with her eyes red and filled with tears, she whispered, "Auntie, those are my paints. Mommy just bought them for me. Can I have them back, please?" Chloe looked up and glanced at her as if she were an annoyance. She sneered. "For some silly little paints? Kids these days are so spoiled," Lily stammered. But you've ruined them, and you broke the brush." I bent down and picked up the brush. It was broken. The bristles, crushed and sticky, were covered in nail polish. There were watercolor stains all over the floor. I felt my mouth go dry. It was a small object, but it was my daughter's joy, something she cared for meticulously, the last corner of her world left to her in a house where her room had already been taken. Before I could say anything, Chloe threw another brush on the floor and snapped, "What's all this crying about? They're worth pennies." At that exact moment, Helen came up the stairs. Seeing Lily crying, she frowned. "What's wrong now?" Chloe spoke up first. "Nothing, Mom. The kid is just being dramatic. I borrowed her paints for a moment for my nails, and she started crying as if someone had died." Helen turned sharply to Lily. "Stop misbehaving. Your aunt is sad. Can't you be a little considerate of her?" Lily, between sobs, looked at her grandmother as if seeking help, but I only asked her to give them back. She broke them. Helen's voice hardened. "If they're broken, your mother will buy you new ones." Honestly, such a little girl, and so possessive. I felt something inside me snap, like a rope stretched too tight. I stood up and looked at her. My voice was no longer soft. "Mom, children's things are theirs too. An adult can't just take them without permission, break them, and then scold the child. It's not right." Helen was taken aback for a second, then her face flushed. "What did you just say? Are you going to teach me how to be a grandmother?" Chloe jumped up, her hands on her hips. "You talk so big, Ava, as if you have any right in this house." I looked directly at Chloe. "Chloe, you are a guest here, so you should be more respectful. You can be sad and need rest. I don't dispute that. But you took my daughter's things without permission, you broke them, and then you yelled at her. Where do you think you're in the right? Chloe's eyes widened. Over a few little things, you'd think they were a national treasure. You're stingy with your money, and even with some miserable paints. That word made Lily startle. She tugged at my sleeve, crying, "Mommy, stop. Don't say any more." I knelt and hugged her. At that moment, I understood she wasn't just crying for her paints. She was crying out of fear. Fear of the arguments, of the adults shouting, of the feeling of always being the one who has to give in. I took a deep breath and addressed Helen, trying to maintain a final shred of respect. "Mom, I'm not arguing to win or lose. I just want you to understand that she's a child and needs to be respected. You can defend Chloe all you want, but please, don't make my daughter the guilty one." Helen smiled coldly. "I don't need you to give me lessons. In this house, what I say goes. And if the girl is a spoiled brat, it's because her mother allows it." I hugged Lily, feeling her tremble like a little bird. I picked up the watercolor box, trying to piece together the broken bits. The small plastic fragments dug into my fingers, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the pain in my chest. I had yielded to keep the peace. I had endured for fear my daughter would grow up without a father. But today, seeing my daughter humiliated in front of me, I understood that if I continued to yield, I would be teaching her a terrible lesson. That others could take what was hers, hurt her, and demand she stay silent. I led Lily out of the room without another word. Behind me, I heard Chloe's murmurs and Helen's reproaches. I didn't turn back. I walked straight to my room, closed the door, and sat with my daughter. Lily, hugging her bear, was crying inconsolably. "Mommy, did I do something wrong?" A lump formed in my throat, and it took me a few seconds to speak. "No, sweetie, you did nothing wrong. You just wanted to protect what's yours, and that's okay." I wiped her tears and looked at my hands, stained with red paint. That color wasn't just watercolor, it was the mark of a line that had been crossed. And for the first time, something became clear inside me. From now on, they could do what they wanted, but no one was to dare touch my daughter. That night, I didn't go down for dinner. I bathed Lily and gave her some puree in our room. She ate while glancing at me, as if to make sure I was still whole. I smiled at her, but my smile was fragile. When she fell asleep, clutching her bear, I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the broken paint box. The chipped colors, the broken brush, the stains at the bottom of the box, it was all so small, yet it hurt as if my heart were being clawed. After 10, Matthew came into the room. He didn't ask if the child was asleep or why my hands were stained with paint. He leaned against the closet and said, with a mix of fatigue and irritation, "What did you do to get Mom and Chloe so worked up?" I looked at him and answered slowly, "You just believe their version? Did you ask Lily?" He frowned. "Ask what? It was just a box of paints, Ava. It's not a big deal." I let out a dry laugh. "To you, it's just a box of paints. To her, it was hers. It was her joy. You didn't see her trembling, not daring to say another word." Matthew said, "So what if she gets a little scolding? You spoil her too much. That's why she acts like this." I clenched my fists, trying to speak quietly so as not to wake the child. "Like what? She only asked for her things back because they were broken. You call that acting like this?" He was silent for a moment, then said something that took my breath away. "Chloe is depressed. Don't mind her. And Mom is just protecting her daughter." I stared at him. Protecting her daughter gives her the right to take her granddaughter's room, use her things, and yell at her. And what about your mother's granddaughter? Have you ever asked her how she feels? Matthew started to lose his patience. "Don't bring the child into this. I already told you. Give in a little, and we'll have peace. If you get stubborn, the house is a living hell." I looked at him, and suddenly, my eyes felt completely empty. His peace consisted of me shutting up and my daughter enduring so his mother and sister could do as they pleased. That peace was like the lid on a pressure cooker. Silence on the outside, a about to explode on the inside. He hardened his voice. "What kind of manners are those? Have some respect. Don't be insolent." I didn't shout. I just asked the question I had been holding back for 7 years. "You ask me not to be insolent. Have you ever asked your mother not to be cruel to me?" He had no answer. He looked away, like someone who doesn't want to face the truth. After a moment, he replied harshly, "You're the daughter-in-law. If Mom says something, you shut up, period." Arguing only puts me in a bad spot. The expression "in a bad spot" made a sigh escape me. I understood that in this marriage, what he feared most wasn't losing his wife or his daughter, but losing face. He wanted me to be submissive for his own peace of mind, not for my happiness. I continued with a calm that surprised even me. "If one day they treat our daughter unfairly, will you also tell her to shut up so as not to put the family in a bad spot?" He frowned. "Don't exaggerate. She's just a child. Children feel pain, humiliation, fear," I replied, "and they know perfectly well who protects them." My sentence seemed to wound his pride. He took a step closer, raising his voice. "Don't tell me how to be a father." I looked at him and felt completely exhausted, not from the argument, but from the realization that I was talking to someone who only wanted to win, not to understand. I said in a very low voice, "I'm not telling you how to be one. I'm just telling you what I see." He was silent for a few seconds, then turned away. "I don't want to continue this. If you keep this up, Mom will hate you even more. And Chloe is only here for a little while. Then she'll leave. Just have a little patience." I listened to his words with bitterness. They had taken my daughter's room, called me stingy for not giving them money, and humiliated the child for protecting what was hers. And for my husband, it all boiled down to having a little patience. I looked at Lily sleeping, her eyelashes trembling as if she were still distressed. In that instant, for the first time, I wondered what would happen if I left. Would my daughter stop being afraid? But immediately, another thought struck me. If I divorced, she would grow up without a father. People would talk. We would have to split Christmases, birthdays. I was terrified she would suffer, that she would feel trapped between two sides. I turned back to Matthew and asked, my voice broken, "Do you love your daughter?" "Of course I do," he replied instantly. I nodded. "Then do one thing. Stop using the excuse of giving in for peace to force my daughter and me to endure. If this house wants peace, it must be based on justice, not on our silence." He didn't answer. He just stood there, breathing heavily, and then left the room. The door closed, not with a slam, but with enough force to make me understand that even soft words can create unbridgeable cracks. That night, lying next to my daughter, I stared into the dense darkness that enveloped the room. I remembered the old sayings about wives being quiet, but I also understood that some pots don't burn from too much heat, but because someone keeps adding salt and forces you to swallow it. I hugged Lily tighter. In her peaceful breathing, I heard the beats of my own heart. It was no longer the heart of a woman who only wanted to save a home, but that of a mother who was learning to stand on her own feet. Sunday morning, I woke up earlier than usual, not out of cheerfulness, but because the atmosphere in the house was becoming increasingly suffocating. I wanted to take advantage of the silence to breathe a little. I made myself some tea and stood by the window, looking at the small garden. The dry leaves were piled up at the base of the bougainvillea, and the wind made the panes vibrate. That's autumn in Chicago. Beautiful and melancholic, quiet and cold. Around 9, my phone rang. The name Olivia appeared on the screen. I paused for a second. Olivia was my best friend from college. She had moved to Melbourne years ago. She sometimes came back to the States, but rarely gave notice. I answered, and before I could express my joy, I heard her laugh. "Ava, I'm back. Can we meet this afternoon?" I looked around. Helen and Chloe hadn't come down yet. Matthew had left for a meeting, and Lily was in her room, painting quietly. "Of course," I whispered. "I'll go out for a bit." "Where are you?" She gave me the address of a small coffee shop on a side street, a quiet place. After hanging up, I felt a strange sensation, as if after a long time locked up, someone had opened a crack in the door. I got ready quickly. I told Lily I was going to see a friend and to stay with Grandma. The little girl nodded, but her eyes followed me to the door as if she were afraid I wouldn't come back. I knelt and kissed her forehead. "I'll be right back. Be good." As I said it, I realized I also needed someone to say those same words to me. The coffee shop was an oasis of green plants and soft music. Olivia was sitting at a corner table in a white shirt and short hair. She was wearing the same watch she used to wear in college. When she saw me, she stood up and gave me a hug, not just any hug, but one of those strong hugs that seem to want to put you back together. "You're so much thinner," she said, looking me up and down. I half smiled. It must be the housework and the kid. Olivia didn't play along. She looked me straight in the eyes with a mix of affection and seriousness. "Ava, don't use that excuse as if it's the only valid reason for you to be withering away." I fell silent. I had always been good at dodging direct questions, but with Olivia, it was impossible. She had known me since I used to laugh out loud, dare to wear the clothes I liked, and say what I thought. She knew I had dreamed of opening a small design studio, that I had spent sleepless nights drawing, my eyes shining with excitement. And now, sitting across from her, I felt like a different person, a woman who measured every word before speaking it. She didn't ask about my in-laws. She started talking about her life, work, the weather, mutual friends. But the more I listened, the more I felt the distance between us. Not a geographical distance, but the one that separates someone who is still the owner of her life from someone who hasn't dared to call her life her own for a long time. After a while, she put down her cup and asked quietly, "Are you okay?" I was about to say yes, the word I had worn out from overuse. But today, for some reason, I couldn't. I just shook my head, very slowly. Olivia looked at me sadly. I knew it. "You're not the type to turn into a shadow for no reason." I smiled, but my eyes filled with tears. "I don't even know when I became this." Olivia leaned toward me. "From the first time you gave in and they didn't thank you. Then you gave in a second time, and they thought it was your duty. And so, your submission became their habit, and your destiny." Her words hit the nail on the head. I took a deep breath, feeling my heart pound. They say you can't fight fate, but they also say that for others to love you, you first have to love yourself. And I had loved others too much, forgetting myself. Olivia opened her purse and took out a long box wrapped with a ribbon. "I have something for you." "No, please," I said, trying to refuse. "Just you coming to see me is enough." She pushed the box toward me. "Accept it. It's not a gift for the mother of the family or the wife of an executive. It's a gift for the 20-year-old Ava." I opened the box. Inside was a jade green silk dress. The fabric was soft and cool, a simple but elegant design, the kind of beauty you appreciate in the details. Touching it, a lump formed in my throat. "You can't keep living as if you're a guest in your own life," Olivia said. "This dress won't make you richer, but it will remind you that you once knew how to be beautiful in your own way." I lowered my head, trying to hide my tears. I hated crying in public, but Olivia took my hand. "Why are you crying?" "Tears exist to be shed, not for others to trample on." I laughed through my tears. It was the same old Olivia. Every word she said was a balm. I took a deep breath, carefully folded the dress, and put it away as if I were saving a piece of my self-esteem that had just been returned to me. On the way home, I hugged the box to my chest. The wind was cold, but inside I felt a comforting warmth, not because the problems had been solved, but because I knew I wasn't alone. Someone still remembered who I was and had noticed how tired I was. I walked through the iron gate. The house was the same, large, bright, imposing, but I knew that from today, something in me had changed. I had a reminder that before being someone's wife, someone's daughter-in-law, or someone's mother, I had been Ava. And if I didn't defend myself, no one would do it for me. Saturday afternoon, the sky filled with gray clouds. I was coming back from the market, loaded with groceries, thinking about what to make for Lily to have a nice dinner. She had been sleeping poorly for several nights, and I didn't want dinner to be another source of tension. As I entered my bedroom, I noticed something was wrong. The closet door was ajar, and I never leave it like that. Years of being a homemaker had made me meticulous. I knew where everything was, especially my personal items. I stopped, my heart racing. It was a strange feeling, as if someone had disturbed the air in the room. I approached and opened the closet. The hangers were in place, but the inner compartment where I had carefully stored the green silk dress Olivia gave me was empty. I searched the shelf incredulously. Nothing. I looked in the back of the closet, in the accessory box. Nothing there either. I stood still, my hand on the closet door, feeling a chill. It was just a dress, but it was the only gift I had received in years. I had stored it with such care, not for its value, but for what it represented. The feeling that someone still saw me with respect. I was about to go downstairs to ask when I heard a car and the click of heels on the patio. Before I could leave, my bedroom door burst open. It was Chloe, and she was wearing my dress, but it wasn't like when I took it out of the box. It had a huge red wine stain on the chest and a tear at the hem, with the silk threads frayed. Chloe didn't even try to hide it. She tossed her hair back and looked at me brazenly. "Oh, you're back," she said, as if she were wearing her own clothes. I heard my own voice, slow and clear. "Who gave you permission to take that dress?" She shrugged. "I borrowed it. It's just a dress. Don't be like that." I walked closer, looking at the stain and the tear, feeling my blood boil. "Borrowed it? And you return it like this? Dirty and torn?" She glanced down at the dress and said indifferently, "I was at a party. Someone spilled a drink on me. The tear must be from getting caught on something. I'll buy you another one." I let out a joyless laugh. "Buy me another one? How? With what money? Or will you borrow that from me too?" She frowned. "You're being so unpleasant." At that moment, Helen came up the stairs. She saw her daughter in the dress, and her face lit up for an instant before turning sour when she saw me in the doorway. "What are you doing just standing there?" I was direct. "Mom, you and Chloe went into my room and took my dress from my closet," Helen sneered. "So what if we did? Is there anything in this house that is exclusively yours?" The poor thing was depressed. She needed a decent dress to go out with her friends and cheer up, and you're making a scene over nothing. I looked at my mother-in-law, feeling a mix of strangeness and familiarity. I said slowly, "Mom, a married couple's bedroom is a private space. Entering without asking and taking something without permission is not right." Helen's voice hardened. "Don't give me lectures. I'm your mother-in-law, and I'm in my son's house. I don't need to ask for permission for anything." I turned to Matthew. He had just come home from work and was at the end of the hall. He had heard almost everything. I waited for him to say something, anything to say that taking things without permission wasn't right, but he just looked at the wine stain and then at me with a weary expression. "Making a scene again?" "Chloe wore it. It got torn. So buy another one, and that's that." I felt a lump form in my throat. "You didn't hear me. It's not about the dress. It's that they came into our room, opened my closet, and took something of mine." "Does that seem normal to you?" Matthew frowned. "Mom already told you she was feeling down. Stop with this nonsense about private and yours. We're a family." I looked at him and saw it clearly. To him, anything of mine could become the family's. My privacy was an unnecessary luxury. Suddenly, Chloe burst into tears, a quick, opportune cry. "I already said I'll pay for it. Why are you humiliating me like this? I'm already miserable enough." Helen instantly hugged her and turned to me. "See? You're crushing her. Her heart is broken. And you're tormenting her over a stupid dress." I smiled bitterly. "Yield. You asked me to yield my daughter's room, to yield my money, and now to yield my personal belongings. How long do I have to yield, Mom?" Helen's eyes widened. "How dare you speak to me like that?" I didn't back down. My voice was firm. "I dare, because I've had enough. If a stranger comes into your house and takes your things, they're called a thief. If it's a family member who comes into your room and takes your things, what do you call it? A right? Or is it also stealing, just hidden behind the word family? The atmosphere grew thick. Chloe stopped crying, a defiant look on her face. Helen was pale with rage, trembling. "Who are you calling a thief?" "I'm not calling anyone a thief," I replied. "I'm just describing an act. Whoever did it will know who I'm referring to." Matthew came closer, furious. "That's enough. Don't insult my mother and my sister." I looked at him, strangely calm. "I haven't insulted anyone. I've only told the truth. And the truth is, they entered our room without permission, took something of mine, ruined it, and acted like it didn't matter. If I stay quiet today, what will they take next?" He was silent for a moment, then said something that froze me inside. "And what do you want us to do?" I answered slowly. "I want something very simple. That from today on, no one enters my room without permission. That no one touches my things or my daughter's without asking. And that Chloe pays me for this dress at its actual value, not as if she's doing me a favor." Chloe sneered. "Pay? And how much are you planning to ask for that rag?" I looked at the tear in the silk, remembering Olivia's words, "A gift for the 20-year-old Ava." I said in a low but firm voice, "It's not a matter of price. It's a matter of responsibility and respect." I didn't wait for her response. I walked up to Chloe and took her by the arm, not forcefully, but with enough firmness for her to understand I was serious. "Take it off and give it back to me." She pulled away, her eyes wide. "What are you doing?" "Taking back what's mine." I looked at her intently. "You have no right to wear it for another minute," Helen screamed. Matthew threatened me, but I didn't move. I didn't want to make a scene, but I knew that if I yielded again, they would once again interpret my kindness as weakness. Finally, Chloe, with a brusque gesture, went into the bathroom. She came out a moment later and threw the dress on my bed as if it were an old rag. I picked it up and held it. The silk was cool, but inside I felt a fire of humiliation and rage. Humiliation for the invasion. Rage because the one person who should have defended me considered it a trifle. I went downstairs with the dress in my arms. I said nothing more. Behind me, I heard Helen's insults, Matthew's sighs, and Chloe's murmurs. I entered the kitchen and laid the dress on the table, irrefutable proof of a line that had been trampled. This time, I no longer felt the need to let it go for the sake of peace. I only felt a cold lucidity. This family had disrespected me for too long, to the point of forgetting that my silence was not permission to do as they pleased. I left the dress on the kitchen table as irrefutable proof. The wine stain and the tear were as obvious and brutal as the way they had invaded my privacy. No one could pretend it was a trivial matter anymore. Helen appeared in the doorway, her arms crossed and her voice icy. "Are you done with the theatrics? You're turning the house upside down over a simple dress." I dried my hands and turned to face her. I was no longer trembling with anger. I just felt a deep exhaustion. "Mom, it's not about the dress. It's about you and Chloe entering my room and opening my closet without permission. As I've already said, that's an invasion of privacy." Chloe came down the stairs, now in different clothes, but her face still tense. She pressed her lips together and suddenly burst into tears. A quick, loud, perfectly rehearsed cry. I'm already miserable enough without my sister-in-law humiliating me like this. She called me a thief. How does she expect me to live like this? I looked at her with surprising calm. "Chloe, I'm not humiliating anyone. I'm just stating the facts. Did you take something from my closet without asking? Did you ruin it and act like it was nothing? That's wrong." Chloe wiped her tears, and her voice became defiant. "And if it's wrong, what are you going to do? Call the police? So brave. You plan to expose me in front of everyone just to feel satisfied?" Helen intervened instantly. "Do you hear that? You're cornering her when she's at her lowest. A woman with such a wicked tongue should prepare for what's coming." I smiled, a faint, bitter smile. I don't know what's coming, Mom. I just know that living in a house without boundaries eventually becomes a hell. How dare you say this house is a hell? Exclaimed Helen, her eyes wide. I'm not talking about the house. I'm talking about the way we treat each other, I replied. You may love your daughter very much, but you can't use that love as an excuse for your granddaughter to suffer and your daughter-in-law to stay silent. Helen took a step closer, hissing through her teeth. Watch your words. You are in my son's house. I looked her directly in the eye, not backing down. You remind me of something very important. I am in your son's house, but I am Matthew's wife and Lily's mother. I am not an employee, and certainly not a punching bag for you to vent your frustrations on. Heavy footsteps sounded behind me. Matthew entered the kitchen, his face grim. He didn't ask how I was, or where the dress came from, nor did he see the humiliation it represented. He only saw his mother and sister being attacked by me, and he snapped, "That's enough, Ava. You're going too far." Going too far? I asked in a low but sharp voice. You think it's going too far for me to complain about them going into my closet and taking my things? In a family, there's no such nonsense as privacy, he retorted. Chloe took it. So what? Why all this fuss about being right? I looked at him, and I felt my heart stop. So if tomorrow I borrow your phone, read all your messages, and then tell you there's no such nonsense in a family, would that seem normal to you? He froze, but only for an instant. His confusion quickly turned to anger. Don't change the subject. You're talking to my mother. Don't disrespect her. Chloe, hiding behind her mother, sobbed again, adding fuel to the fire. Helen immediately took her daughter's hand and declared, Matthew, look at her. Your wife is disrespecting us. If you don't put a stop to it, she'll walk all over you. The expression put a stop to it struck me as almost comical. The only lesson they knew in that house was to teach me to yield, to be quiet, and to endure. I took a deep breath. I'm not disrespecting anyone. I simply don't accept my space being invaded and then being made to feel guilty about it. Matthew approached, his eyes bloodshot with wounded pride. And what else do you want? I want your mother and sister to respect boundaries, I replied. And I want you to take the side of what is right. That's all. The phrase, what is right, seemed to wound him to the core of his ego. He smiled bitterly. For you, what is right is always you. You're always right. I shook my head. No. What's right is not taking other people's things without permission. What's right is not scolding a child for protecting what's hers. And what's right is not treating your wife as if she's everyone's wallet. At that point, Matthew exploded. He grabbed my arm forcefully, yanking me. The pull made me stumble, and I almost hit the edge of the counter. I heard Helen's choked gasp, Chloe's silence, and the rush of blood in my ears. Matthew yelled at me, no longer keeping up appearances. What's all this fuss about? If you can't serve my mother and my sister, then get out of this house. The words get out landed like a hammer blow. I stood motionless, not out of fear, but because I had just heard aloud what I had long suspected. To this man, I was only valuable as long as I was useful. I looked at the hand gripping my arm, then at his face. Curiously, I didn't cry. I didn't even tremble. I just felt a door close inside me softly, but definitively. I pulled away and stood up straight. I looked at all of them, one by one, Helen, Chloe, and finally Matthew. My voice was so serene that it surprised even me. Fine. A divorce. Helen burst out laughing. Who do you think you're scaring? Without Matthew, you'll end up on the street with your daughter. Chloe joined in the laughter, a cruel, triumphant laugh. Matthew froze for a second, but quickly regained his composure. If that's what you want, then go. But don't you regret it? I nodded slowly. I'll go, but not in the way you think. I turned and walked out of the kitchen with a calm that seemed rehearsed. I didn't need to shout, or throw anything in their faces, or argue anymore. Sometimes, talking too much only demeans you. I went straight upstairs, opened a wooden cabinet in the hallway, and took out a small metal box. something I hadn't touched in years because I once wanted to believe I would never need it. The lid opened, releasing a faint smell of old paper. I took out a folder. My heart was as calm as a still lake. 7 years of submission had condensed into a single moment of clarity. He had chosen to say, "Get out," and I had chosen not to stay to be told a second time. I went downstairs with the folder in my arms. The steps seemed longer than ever, not because my legs were shaking, but because I felt the last thread that tied me down. Snap the thread called, "I'll just endure a little longer." The living room was lit. Helen sat on the sofa like a feigned queen. Chloe was beside her, her eyes still moist but with a restrained smile. And Matthew stood by the window, his back to me in a gesture of false disdain, but his shoulders were tense. I placed the folder on the coffee table. The sharp sound made all 3 of them turn. "What new trick is this?" Matthew asked harshly. "No trick," I replied calmly. "I'm just doing what you asked. I'm getting out of this house. But before I go, there are a few things to clear up to avoid misunderstandings." Helen snorted. "There's nothing to clear up. If you're leaving, you're leaving. Don't try to threaten us." I looked at her, without anger or joy. I opened the folder and took out the first document, the property deed. I placed it on the table, turned towards them. "This is the deed to the house," I said. Chloe glanced at it and froze. Helen leaned forward. Matthew walked over and read the owner's name, squinting. I saw the color drain from his face, as if a bucket of cold water had been thrown on him. I took out the second document, the purchase agreement, and the third, the payment receipts. I didn't say much, just laid them out neatly on the table, each paper like a nail sealing a reality. Matthew picked up one of the sheets, turning it over, his voice hoarse. This is in your name." I nodded. "In my name." Helen jumped up. "What kind of trickery is this? Matthew has lived in this house for 7 years. How dare you say it's yours?" "The papers say it clearly," I replied with the same calm. "The purchase agreement was signed 3 months before Matthew and I got married. I'm not saying it's mine. I'm just showing the truth." Chloe, trying to find a way out, stammered. "But Matthew always said the house was a company benefit for executives." Mom heard it too. I looked at Chloe with a sharp gentleness. "That's what you wanted to hear, but the documents speak for themselves. The house is in my name, and so are the cars." I took out the 2 vehicle registrations and added them to the pile. Matthew stared at them, a vein throbbing in his temple. He stammered, "It can't be. Your father said he would help us." "My father never said the house was yours." I cut him off. "He simply didn't clarify so as not to hurt your pride. But you and your family have gotten so used to taking things for granted that you've come to believe everything you enjoyed belonged to you." Helen lunged at the papers, desperately searching for some line to cling to. "It's a trick. You've been deceiving my son all this time." I didn't flinch. "Legal documents are not a trick, Mom. If I had wanted to set a trap, I wouldn't have endured in silence for 7 years. I did it to keep the peace, because my daughter needed a father. But my silence did not mean I had no rights." Chloe suddenly changed her tone, trying to smooth things over. "Sis, at the end of the day, we're family. Let's talk things over calmly. If you do this, you'll make Matthew look ridiculous." I let out a bitter laugh. Ridiculous? When Matthew grabbed my arm, nearly throwing me to the ground? When he told me to get out? Did anyone think about my dignity then? Or does my dignity only matter when it threatens yours? Matthew slammed his fist on the table. "You had this all planned from the beginning. You hid it so you could kick us out now." I looked at him directly. "I'm not kicking anyone out for sport. I'm just reclaiming what is mine and my daughter's safety. The one who's planning isn't me. The one who's planning is the one who asks for $30,000 for surgery. The one who's planning is the one who takes a child's room. The one who's planning is the one who takes things from someone else's closet and says, 'We're family.'" Matthew was speechless. Helen was still shouting. "And what do you plan to do? Throw us out on the street?" "I plan to get a divorce," I replied, "and I demand that the people who have no property rights to this house collect their personal effects and leave." Chloe looked at me, horrified. You dare to kick out your own mother-in-law? I'm not kicking out my mother-in-law, I corrected her coolly. I am demanding that the people occupying my legal property without respecting boundaries leave. As for family relationships, let everyone reflect on their actions. In this life, you reap what you sow. Helen, purple with rage, swept the papers off the table with a swipe of her hand. They flew through the air like dry leaves. I'm not leaving. This is my son's house. I bent down and slowly picked up each sheet. If you don't leave peacefully, Mom, it will have to be the hard way. I don't want to make a scene in front of the child, but if you continue like this, I will call my lawyer and the police to file a report. Matthew approached, lowering his voice. You think you've won? You think because you have some papers, you can do whatever you want? I looked up and stared at him for a long time. I don't want to win against you, Matthew. I just want that from today on. No one will ever trample on my daughter and me again. In the living room, the ticking of the wall clock sounded abnormally loud. The three of them fell silent. Not because they had understood, but because they had just been hit with a dose of reality that had woken them from the dream they had been living in for too long. I put the papers back in the folder and closed it. I stood up. Tonight, pack your things. Tomorrow, I will speak with my lawyer. I am giving you the opportunity to choose a dignified and legal exit. I said no more. I went upstairs and entered the room. Seeing Lily asleep, my heart softened. Outside, they could scream, cry, or curse. But inside me, at that moment, there was only one certainty. Some mothers rise up not for revenge, but so their children will never have to bow their heads in their own home again. I had barely gone upstairs when a crash of plates and glasses erupted from below. It wasn't the sound of someone packing, but of unleashed rage. I stopped on the landing and heard Helen's voice. I'm not leaving. I've been here for 7 years. I have my rights. Then, Chloe's voice, sharper and more venomous. She wants to throw us out on the street so everyone can laugh at us. How twisted. And finally, Matthew's deep voice. If you've brought it to this point, don't complain about the consequences. I took a deep breath and went into the child's room. Lily was still sleeping. Though her brow was slightly furrowed, my heart ached. I knew if I went down to argue, the shouting would escalate and wake her. For a child, fear doesn't need blows. The sound of adults screaming is enough to leave a scar. I closed the door to her room, went into the hallway, and picked up my phone. This time, I didn't call anyone to complain. I called my lawyer, Mr. Davis. He answered instantly with his usual calm. Tell me, Ava. I explained the situation briefly. They don't want to leave the house. They're agitated. I fear for my daughter's safety and the integrity of my property. Don't argue with them, he advised. Stay calm. The best thing to do is have it officially recorded. I'll send someone from my office, and I recommend you notify the Homeowners Association president or the local police to act as witnesses and ensure everything is done by procedure. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. Understood. I went downstairs. The living room was in chaos. Helen, in the center, was gesticulating, her eyes red. Chloe, slumped on the sofa, was clutching her purse as if afraid it would be stolen. Matthew was pacing back and forth, furious. When she saw me, Helen lunged at me. Who did you call? Are you planning to bring strangers here to humiliate us? I didn't respond to her provocation. I said clearly, I have called my lawyer, and I am going to notify the authorities to file a report that you are causing a disturbance on my property. Matthew looked at me with hatred. You're crazy. Doing that will turn this into a public scandal. You're worried about a public scandal, but you're not worried about your daughter hearing every day that she should get out or that she's living on borrowed time? I retorted. I'm choosing the clean way. No shouting or fighting, just the legal route. Chloe stood up and pulled at her mother. Mom, don't be scared. She's just threatening us. She can't kick out her own mother-in-law. I looked at Chloe coldly. Family ties do not make what is illegal legal, Chloe. If you want to stay, present a legal basis. If you don't have one, Pack your things." Helen, beside herself, grabbed a picture frame from a shelf with the intention of smashing it on the floor. I stepped in front of it, not to wrestle, but to shield it with my body. "Don't do that, Mom," I said in a low but firm voice. "There's a child sleeping. One crash and you'll scare her for life." She hesitated for an instant, but her rage was stronger. She threw some decorative books on the floor. The dull thud startled me. I didn't wait any longer. I went out and called the president of the Homeowners Association, whose number I had from the neighborhood group. I also informed the local police that there were people causing a disturbance at my residence. I explained the situation bluntly: a dispute over a property in my name and the need for an authority to be present to prevent altercations. In less than half an hour, the president and a police patrol arrived. Mr. Davis also showed up, accompanied by 2 security guards from the community, who stayed discreetly outside to ensure no one got violent or took anything that wasn't personal. As soon as she saw the strangers, Helen's attitude changed drastically. She stopped shouting and began to wail, adopting the role of a victim. "Look, gentlemen, what my daughter-in-law is doing to me. She deceived me, and now she's throwing me out on the street." Mr. Davis didn't play her game. He opened his briefcase, showed the documents to the authorities, and got straight to the point. "The property is in Mrs. Ava's name from before her marriage. Disturbances are occurring inside. We request that a report of the situation be filed and that the individuals with no right of residence be required to collect their personal effects and vacate the premises to ensure order." The police officer, with great professionalism, asked everyone to remain calm. They took note of the disorder, the thrown objects, and the tense atmosphere. I signed the report without my hand trembling. It was strange, but in that moment, I no longer felt fear, only the certainty of doing the right thing. Matthew, pale, tried one last argument. "I am her husband. I've lived here for years. I've contributed." Mr. Davis interrupted him. "Contributing to household expenses does not generate property rights over a separate asset. If you wish to claim something, you can do so through the courts, but at this moment, you have no right to disturb the peace," Helen cried. Chloe cried, but their tears no longer moved me. I was only thinking of Lily sleeping upstairs. It would only take one more noise to wake her. I wanted it all to be over as soon as possible. Finally, under the supervision of the authorities, they had no choice but to start packing. Chloe dragged her suitcases, her face filled with hatred. Helen left, hurling curses. Matthew remained silent, the silence of someone who has just lost something he thought was his forever. That night, when they left, I watched the iron gate close. I didn't feel the triumph I had imagined, only an immense relief, as if a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders. But life rarely grants you peace immediately. A few days later, I found out they had moved into the old family apartment in a working-class neighborhood, a small, damp place. Going from a villa to a tiny apartment was too great a blow to their pride, and when pride is wounded, people seek revenge. Chloe convinced Matthew to file for divorce, demanding half of the increase in the house's value during the marriage and, what was worse, custody of Lily. His argument was that he had a stable job and financial means, while I, having been a stay-at-home mother, was not equipped to raise my daughter. Reading it, I smiled bitterly. I could understand them claiming money, but claiming my daughter? That was crossing a line no one had the right to cross. I looked at myself in the mirror, pulled my hair back, and held my gaze. The woman in the reflection was not the same one from 7 years ago, and I understood that the real battle had only just begun. Matthew's divorce petition arrived quickly. He claimed compensation for the increase in the property's value and custody of Lily, arguing that he was the family's breadwinner and that I, as a stay-at-home mother, was not prepared to raise her. I read the document without my hand trembling. What used to make me tremble were the shouts in the kitchen, my mother-in-law's glare, or my husband's silence. The paper, however, did not scream or judge. It only stated facts. In my first meeting, Mr. Davis was direct. "Ava, we must focus on Lily's well-being. The property issue is clear, but they will try to attack you for being a stay-at-home mom, arguing you have no means or ability. I nodded. I understood. They could call me cold or calculating, but if they touched my daughter, I would not yield. Days later, Olivia called me, her voice subdued. "Ava, I just saw Matthew checking into a downtown hotel with a woman. I'm not sure, but they seemed very intimate." I was silent for a long time. The truth is, I had always had my suspicions. The calls he had to take outside, the sudden work trips, the expenses he justified as business lunches. I had convinced myself they were normal things for a man in his position. I was afraid of being paranoid, of imagining things. In that moment, I understood that often, it's not that women don't know the truth, it's that we prefer to deceive ourselves to have a reason to stay. Following my lawyer's advice, I began to discreetly and legally gather evidence. And then I saw the harsh reality. Matthew was having an affair with Elena, his ex-girlfriend. It wasn't a one-night stand, but something that had been going on for a while, meetings disguised as work. But what chilled my blood wasn't the infidelity. It was an audio recording in which Matthew told Elena with complete naturalness, "I'll threaten her with taking custody, and you'll see how she softens up. Ava is terrified of losing the kid, and if the judge ends up giving her to me, I'll put her in a boarding school and we'll get the problem out of the way." I listened, without being able to cry. I just felt nauseous. A father can be unfaithful to his wife, but to speak of his own daughter as if she were an obstacle to be removed? What was left of him? At the settlement hearing, Matthew's family's performance was masterful. My mother-in-law cried, recounting her sacrifices. Chloe sobbed beside her, and Matthew spoke of a 7-year marriage, of how I had deceived him into believing the house was his. I remained silent, letting them vent. People are like that. The more they are in the wrong, the more they need to talk, as if words could turn a lie into truth. When it was my lawyer's turn, Mr. Davis didn't engage in drama. He simply presented the evidence. The deed to the house signed before the marriage, the origin of the funds from my personal account, and the payments for major renovations, also from my account. He made it clear that changing a light bulb or fixing a faucet does not generate property rights. It was all as clear as day. When they moved on to custody, they argued I would be busy looking for a job, while he had stability. Mr. Davis only asked Matthew a few very simple questions. What is Lily allergic to? What is her favorite food? What scares her most about thunderstorms? What did she learn in school last week? What is her teacher's name? Matthew stammered. He looked from side to side, unable to answer. Not because he was stupid, but because he had never truly lived with his daughter in the sense of caring for her. He had been physically present, but the details that weave a bond, her routines, her meals, her fevers, her tears, belonged to me. In the next session, we presented the definitive proof, the audio recording. The room fell silent. I saw Helen turn pale. Perhaps for the first time, she realized her son was not just self-centered, but someone capable of using his own granddaughter as a bargaining chip. Chloe lowered her head, her lips pressed together. Her arrogance had vanished. The final judgment was shorter than I expected. The divorce granted the divorce. The house was declared a separate asset, dismissing any claim, and custody of Lily was granted to me. Matthew would have to pay child support and could see the child according to a visitation schedule, as long as it did not affect her emotional stability. Leaving the courthouse, I didn't feel like a victor. I felt free. Free from a home that took my submission for granted. Free from a man who used the word family to silence me. In the following days, Elena disappeared as quickly as she had appeared. Helen and Chloe returned to the small apartment, to a life of hardship and constant friction. Chloe still dreamed of luxury. But there was no one left to finance her renewal package. And Matthew, without his status, without his house, and without the facade that supported him, lost everything. Some sentences are not served in a prison, but in the contempt of others. I repainted Lily's room. I put her shelf back, her drawing corner. I bought her a new box of watercolors and sat with her to finish that drawing of the house. "Mommy, Will we be peaceful now? She asked. I hugged her and replied, Yes, sweetie, because Mommy is never going to let anyone scare you again. The lesson I learned from all this is very simple. In a marriage, yielding isn't wrong, but yielding to the point of losing your own boundaries is a mistake that you end up paying for. And what's worse, so do your children. A home is only worthwhile if there is respect, security, and justice within it.